Well, the Government and Public Policy think tank has been doing work around research into state capture, state reform and professionalizing government institutions. Dr. Ivor Chipkin joins us tonight with more of his own response to what the President had to say. Professor Chipkin, Dr. Chipkin rather, good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Look, overall, when we heard what the President said, it's clear that there's a need to reform the state, and he believes that making regulatory changes through Parliament would perhaps be the best way to start. Now, if we are seeing that as the answer to the question, is it responding really to the cause of the problems that we're seeing in the state?
Good evening, Kathy. Hi. I think it's potentially a useful approach if in the way you've framed it. I'm not certain, though, his approach is the way that what you've described as a regulatory approach. I do think there's a strong tendency from within government and from within civil society to understand that the way to deal with state capture is to lock up a lot of bad people, which of course needs to be done. But what gets obscured is precisely what you're foregrounding, is the regulatory or institutional dynamics. So I think he's tinkering with that. I think the recommendations around the way in which boards of SOEs need to operate suggest that they're beginning to understand that some sort of distinction needs to be introduced between political office and administrative office, that you cannot have ministers involved in operational decisions, you cannot have boards involved in procurement decisions. So I do think very embryonically there is something happening there. Of course, that's a space which we need to fight for. All of this needs to be seen against the context. I mean, in a broader context, and that is we don't know whether Ramaphosa is going to survive, never mind the next 2 months, the next couple of weeks. It's certainly something which former President Thabo Mbeki put on the agenda. It seemed all the presidents were speaking this weekend, the former presidents were speaking this weekend, saying that we need to come to terms with the possibility that Ramaphosa will be impeached from the Phala event. So my concern is that there's a kind of embryonic movement, so it's not even momentum yet, but there's something happening that will be cut short if Ramaphosa goes. And I think that's how tentative these movements are.
The one thing that you've been doing extensive research on is the link between the internal wranglings and fights of the ANC and how that translates into what government is able to do on a day-to-day basis. Ivor, it seems to me that, you know, for a long time, the struggle to depoliticize the government, to depoliticize the state, is really going to continue to be one of the biggest hindrances to any progress that we want to see as a country.
Yeah, I think you put your finger on what for me is one of the key dynamics of contemporary South Africa, and a dynamic that will largely determine how this dynamic is resolved or dealt with, will largely determine our future. For reasons which are quite extraordinary, we can discuss, we don't have the time to discuss them now. The ANC from the 1990s, so this is not a Jacob Zuma phenomenon, this is a phenomenon from the 1990s. The ANC chose, rather than to deal with the politicization of the public administration of the apartheid period by professionalizing our public service, they chose to continue in that path of politicization. A different kind of politicization. The ANC wanted to keep its hands on the operational side of government, and so it deliberately it politicized the structure of our administration, the architecture of government, if you like. Cadre deployment, which everyone talks about, is merely a symptom of a broader architectural issue. So we've allowed, in the way in which government has emerged institutionally, for the blurring of the lines between political office and administrative office. And it's that blurring of lines that permitted, if you like, state capture, because political factions or politicians were able, precisely because these lines were blurred, to bring in their political allies, their friends, their families even, into high political office. So in my mind, the major struggle in South Africa is to professionalize the public service, which means to enter a firm distinction between political office and administrative office, so that the public service can emerge as an autonomous institution in its own right. I think the international experience shows unambiguously that this is the way towards economic growth and development. It's also a way in which democracies function, or effective democracies function. It's the major struggle, I think, for the future of South Africa.
There is also a bit of a disjuncture in hearing the President present a statement that, he describes as being Cabinet's response to the State Capture Inquiry report, and makes no mention of the fact that there are some members of the very same cabinet that he's speaking for that have threatened to take that report on review. And it almost seems to completely avoid the fact that even within cabinet, there might not necessarily be consensus about state capture, the role that it has played, and the kind of accountability that subsequently needs to be effected.
Yeah, it was interesting. There was a very, very loud silence in yesterday's announcement. He talked about the broad support for the recommendations, findings. The one organization that he didn't mention, which is so deeply implicated in the findings of the Zondo report, is the ANC. So it's so interesting that this is a cabinet response. The degree to which it's shared within the ANC, I'm not so sure. I think that was a very, very loud silence in that regard, and maybe it speaks to a profound tension in the current situation. I think there are many in the ANC that are deeply invested in the politicization of the administration. I think the ability to deploy political allies within the administrations provides them with resources for patronage, for sustaining their own political support. So it's very, very tempting or very enticing to continue in that direction. On the other hand, the politicizing of administrations has led to, quite frankly, catastrophic governance failures almost across the board, from municipalities, provinces, even in national administrations. So you're having so I think these are some of the tensions going on.
Dr. Ivor Chipkin, we'll leave it there for tonight. He's the Director of Government and Public Policy.